No nation in modern history tried harder to build an aircraft carrier and failed more completely than Germany. Across two world wars, they drew up plans, laid keels, launched hulls, stripped civilian liners, and seized foreign ships, all in pursuit of a carrier force that would never once put to sea. Every other major naval power eventually got their flat tops into combat. Britain, America, Japan, even tiny nations like the Netherlands managed to operate carriers at some point. Germany never did. Not once. Not ever. This is the complete story of every aircraft carrier Germany ever attempted, from the improvised seaplane experiments of 1914 to the rusting, half-finished hulk of Graf Zeppelin sunk at the bottom of the Baltic. 17 ships, 17 failures. And a question that still haunts naval historians today: what would have happened if Germany had actually gotten it right? SMS Friedrich Karl, Germany's accidental first. The story begins not with ambition, but with improvisation. In October 1914, just weeks after the outbreak of the Great War, the armored cruiser SMS Friedrich Karl became the first German warship to carry aircraft. There was nothing planned about it. Two seaplanes were loaded aboard in a completely improvised arrangement, with no permanent modifications and no real doctrine for how they might be used. Germany was feeling its way in the dark, just like everyone else, but the experiment never got a chance to prove itself. On November 17, 1914, SMS Friedrich Karl struck two Russian mines in the Baltic Sea, capsized, and sank. Germany's first naval aviation experiment went to the bottom before it had done a single useful thing. It was an ominous beginning, and in hindsight, almost a prophecy for everything that would follow. SMH Glindwer, when Germany had to steal its first carrier. Moving forward just a few weeks, in August 1914, Germany demonstrated a truth that would define its entire carrier program. When you cannot build what you need, you take it from someone else. The British freighter SS Craig Ronald was seized in the port of Danzig and immediately pressed into service, renamed SMH Glindwer, and designated Germany's first dedicated seaplane carrier. The conversion was as minimal as it gets. 4 seaplanes were stored on the open fore and aft decks, lowered into the sea by a single cargo boom, with no hangars, no protection from weather, and no real infrastructure of any kind. She was rendered unserviceable by mine damage in 1916, but her brief and undignified service established the pattern. Germany's own shipyards were not delivering fast enough, so requisitioning foreign hulls became official policy. It was a policy that would define German carrier aviation for the entire war, and one that Germany would return to again in the Second War, 25 years later. SMH Answald/FS1, Germany's first official aircraft ship. The next step forward came with the Hamburg-Bremen Africa Linie cargo ship Answald, taken in hand for conversion in 1914 and commissioned as Flugzeugschiff 1, which translates simply as Airplane Ship 1. She was Germany's first vessel to receive that official designation from the Kaiserliche Marine. At 13,200 tons, she was a substantial hull, and she carried 3 seaplanes in proper enclosed hangars built fore and aft, which was a genuine improvement over Glinder's open-deck arrangement. But Answald had a fatal problem. Her top speed of 10 knots made fleet operations completely impossible. She was slower than the ships she was supposed to support, which meant she was essentially a floating hangar that could only operate independently. After the war, she was handed to Britain as part of war reparations and served in the merchant navy as Vulcan City until she was broken up in 1933. Germany's first official aviation ship, technically, was not even a German-designed vessel. SMH, Santa Elena/FS2, the best Germany never built. If Flugzeugschiff 1 was a modest step forward, then FS2 was a genuine leap. The Hamburg Süd passenger cargo liner Santa Elena was requisitioned in 1914 and commissioned as Flugzeugschiff 2 in 1915, and she turned out to be the most capable German carrier of the entire First World War. She carried 4 seaplanes in twin side-loading hangars, but at her operational peak, she went far beyond that, serving as a floating base for 16 Friedrichshafen FF-33 floatplanes moored to booms alongside her hull. 16 aircraft. That was the largest concentration of German naval aviation ever assembled on a single ship during that war. The irony was impossible to ignore. The most effective carrier the Imperial German Navy ever operated was a converted Argentine mail liner, not a purpose-built warship, not even a German-built hull. Santa Elena survived the war, then passed through American, French, British, and Italian ownership over the following decades, and was finally sunk at Marseille in August 1944, bombed or scuttled in. The closing years of the very next war. SMH Oswald/FS3, the last of the stolen carriers. To complete the WWI picture, we come to Flugzeugschiff 3, and she is perhaps the most telling symbol of Germany's entire carrier predicament. The British freighter SS Oswestry was seized at Danzig in August 1914, spent years doing unglamorous work as a minesweeper depot ship, and was only converted into a proper seaplane carrier between February and July of 1918, in the final year of the war. She carried 4 Friedrichshafen FF-29 floatplanes in hangars fore and aft, and was attached to the 4th Torpedo Boat Flotilla for fleet support. She was the most elaborate of all the merchant conversions. But look at what Germany had built. FS-1 was a German civilian ship, FS-2 was Argentine-built, and FS-3 was a British freighter. Not one vessel in Germany's entire WWI carrier fleet was purpose-designed or purpose-built for naval aviation. Every single one was someone else's hull wearing a new coat of paint. Oswald was surrendered to Britain in December 1919, sold into Japanese merchant service, and eventually sunk by American aircraft on July 25, 1945, outlasting the entire German carrier program by 3 decades. SMS Stuttgart, Germany's only true seaplane cruiser. Now, stepping away from the merchant conversions, we come to the one ship that genuinely represented a different approach. Work began on Stuttgart's conversion at the Imperial Dockyard in Wilhelmshaven on January 21, 1918, and she was recommissioned on May 16, 1918, as Germany's first warship fast enough to actually operate alongside the High Seas Fleet as an aviation vessel. At 23 knots, she was the only German aviation ship capable of keeping pace with fleet operations. She carried 3 seaplanes in 2 large hangars fitted aft of her funnels. Compared to the slow merchant conversions that had come before, Stuttgart was a real step forward. But she came 4 years too late and carried 3 aircraft when the fleet needed 30. By the time Germany finally built a proper aviation warship, the war had 10 months left to run. She was decommissioned after the armistice and scrapped. A correct solution delivered too late to matter. SMS Rhön, the conversion that never happened. Stuttgart's success immediately prompted plans for more. SMS Rhön was selected in 1917 and 1918 as Germany's second seaplane cruiser, intended to carry 4 aircraft and finally give the High Seas Fleet meaningful airborne reconnaissance capability at genuine fleet speed. The Kaiserliche Werft in Wilhelmshaven reviewed the plans and confirmed that conversion work could not begin before 1919. Germany's defeat in November 1918 killed the project entirely. Rune was stricken for disposal on November 25, 1920, and subsequently scrapped. And so Germany ended the First World War with one real aviation warship, a handful of converted merchant vessels, no operational carrier doctrine, and the clear knowledge that every major naval power was moving toward true flight deck carriers capable of launching and recovering wheeled aircraft. It was a lesson that would take them another 18 years to even attempt to act on. SS Ausonia/Carrier 1, WWI, Germany's first true carrier concept. Before leaving the First World War entirely, there is one more project that demands attention, because it shows that someone in the Imperial Navy was thinking clearly about the future. In early 1918, the Imperial Navy proposed converting the incomplete Italian passenger liner SS Ausonia, which happened to be under construction in a Hamburg shipyard, into Germany's first flush-deck carrier, capable of operating wheeled aircraft rather than floatplanes. The design was genuinely ambitious. She was planned to carry between 23 and 30 aircraft across 3 hangar decks, with a 128.5-meter flight deck and a separate 30-meter takeoff ramp on the bow. This was years ahead of most Allied thinking at the time. But once again, Germany turned to a foreign hull because no purpose-built German carrier hull existed. And once again, the U-boat campaign consumed every available resource. The project was abandoned without a single modification made to the ship. Ausonia was eventually broken up for scrap in 1922. The vision existed. Germany simply could not build the ship to carry it. Graf Zeppelin/Flugzeugträger A, the only German carrier ever launched. The interwar years passed without a single German carrier project. Then, on December 28, 1936, at the Deutsche Werke shipyard in Kiel, the keel of Graf Zeppelin was laid down on a slipway just vacated by the battleship Gneisenau. She was Germany's largest warship project at the time, measuring 262.5 meters long and displacing 33,550 tons at full load. She was launched on December 8, 1938, and on paper she was formidable. Her air group was eventually settled at 30 Ju-87 Stukas and 12 Bf-109 fighters. She carried 16 heavy 15-centimeter guns, heavier armament than almost any foreign carrier, because German planners assumed she would operate without cruiser escorts in the North Sea. Her armored flight deck was so heavy it created stability problems, and hull bulges had to be fitted in 1942 just to restore adequate balance. By September 1939, when the war began, she was approximately 85% complete, and construction was immediately halted as U-boat production took absolute priority. Then came the humiliation that no one involved would ever want to admit. Between 1941 and 1942, Graf Zeppelin was used as a floating warehouse storing hardwood timber. Germany's most advanced warship, storing wood. Hermann Göring compounded the disaster by jealously guarding Luftwaffe authority over all aircraft, meaning the Kriegsmarine could never develop its own naval aviators. The only carrier pilot unit trained before the war was disbanded in 1940 when construction halted. Pearl Harbor, Taranto, and the sinking of the Bismarck gave Admiral Raeder the political leverage to convince Hitler to restart construction in May 1942, and work resumed with real urgency. But the Battle of the Barents Sea in December 1942 so enraged Hitler that he ordered all large warships scrapped. On February 2, 1943, the Graf Zeppelin project was formally and permanently cancelled. Her skeleton crew scuttled her in the Parnitz River near Stettin on April 25, 1945, as the Red Army closed in. The Soviets raised her in March 1946, used her as a weapons test target, and finally sank her in the Baltic on August 16, 1947. Her flight deck never launched a single aircraft in its entire existence. Her wreck lay unknown for decades until a Polish survey ship discovered it in July 2006, resting 88 meters deep near the port of Leba. Flugzeugträger B/Peter Strasser, destroyed before launch. Graf Zeppelin was never meant to sail alone. Moving to the second purpose-built German carrier of World War II, the ship laid down at Germania Werft in Kiel in 1938 would almost certainly have been named Peter Strasser, after the commander of Germany's naval airships in WWY. The Kriegsmarine only named ships at launch, so she never received a name at all. Work halted on September 19, 1939, just weeks after the war began, with the hull barely above the armored deck. Admiral Raeder ordered it broken up and scrapped on February 28, 1940, to free the slipway for submarines. Germany's second purpose-built carrier was destroyed before it ever touched water, scrapped to build the very submarines that were at that moment losing the Battle of the Atlantic. The plan to give Germany a two-carrier force died on a slipway in Kiel before the first winter of the war was over. Flugzeugträger C and D, paper ships. On the subject of ships that never existed, Plan Z, unveiled in 1938, envisioned two additional carriers beyond Graf Zeppelin and Peter Strasser. Designated simply C and D, they were planned to be operational by 1945, which would have given Germany a four-carrier fleet, genuinely comparable to what Britain was building at the same time. Neither ship progressed beyond design studies. Both were quietly cancelled, as the realities of a two-front war made a four-carrier fleet obviously impossible. Germany had planned for four purpose-built carriers, started two, launched one, and completed none. Flugzeugträger C and D never even earned the dignity of a keelplate. SS Europa/Carrier 1, World War II. Too big to fix. By 1942, with the purpose-built program in ruins, Germany did exactly what it had done in 1914. It turned to civilian hulls. In May 1942, the Kriegsmarine selected the luxury liner SS Europa for conversion into the largest German carrier ever attempted. As designed, she would have carried 42 aircraft on a 276-meter flight deck and displaced up to 56,500 tons at full load, dwarfing even the unfinished Graf Zeppelin. 28 years after seizing Glyndwr, Germany was still trying to turn someone else's civilian ship into a carrier. This time, the problem was physics. Insurmountable stability problems, caused by the need to recess the hangar deck into the primary structural deck, proved impossible to correct. The project was cancelled in November 1942 with no work done to the ship at all. Europa survived the war, was seized by American forces, and eventually resumed commercial service. She is the only German carrier project whose hull lived to see peacetime. SS Gneisenau/Jade, too slow to bother. The same month that the Europa project was being evaluated, the passenger liner SS Gneisenau was selected for conversion into an auxiliary carrier to be named Jade. Engineers rapidly concluded she was simply too slow for fleet operations. Work never started. Jade never progressed beyond a name on a requisition form. Another civilian hull that Germany tried, briefly considered, and failed to turn into a warship. The pattern was becoming relentless. SS Potsdam/Elbe, stripped and abandoned. Unlike Jade, the passenger liner SS Potsdam actually saw some physical work begin. Selected alongside Gneisenau in May 1942 for conversion into the auxiliary carrier Elbe, her conversion began in December 1942, when workers stripped out her passenger fittings. Then, in February 1943, Hitler's orders halting all major surface ship work killed the project before anything meaningful had been installed. What remained was a gutted liner, her interior stripped bare, that spent the rest of the war as a barracks ship. She survived until 1976. Elbe got further than Jade, but not by much. She was a passenger ship with her furniture removed, not a carrier, and everyone involved knew it. Seydlitz/Weser, the most advanced conversion that never flew. Of all the World War II conversion projects, one came closer than any other to actually becoming a real carrier. The heavy cruiser Seydlitz, the fourth of the Admiral Hipper class, was 95% complete and sitting idle at the Germania Werft yard when the Kriegsmarine decided in May 1942 to convert her. Renamed Weser, she had approximately 2,400 tons of superstructure stripped away to prepare for a full carrier conversion. Her planned hangar measured 137.5 meters in length, and her air group of 10 Bf-109 fighters and 10 Ju-87 Stukas represented a realistic and achievable target for a converted cruiser hull. Real work was done. Real steel was cut. A real warship hull was being transformed into a real carrier. Then, in June 1943, the work was halted on Hitler's orders before the flight deck was ever installed. She was towed to Königsberg in April 1944 to escape Allied bombing, scuttled on January 29, 1945, and later salvaged and scrapped by the Soviets. Weser came closer to becoming a carrier than anything else in the German World War II program, and she still never flew a single aircraft. The most advanced German carrier conversion of the entire war, and still a failure. De Grasse/Carrier 2. Germany's last carrier hope. The final chapter of Germany's carrier story is, in many ways, the most fitting. The incomplete French light cruiser De Grasse was captured in the Arsenal de Lorient shipyard when Germany occupied France in 1940. In 1942, she was selected for conversion into an auxiliary carrier designated Carrier 2, designed to carry 23 fighters and dive bombers. Once again, just as in both world wars, Germany turned to a captured foreign hull because it had no other options. But this time, there was a new complication. The French shipyard workers at Lorient, in no hurry to build a warship for their occupiers, worked with deliberate slowness. They were later discovered to have hidden significant quantities of materials inside the ship's double bottom rather than installing them. Sabotage through bureaucratic exhaustion. The project was abandoned by early 1943, killed by design concerns, material shortages, and Allied bombing of Lorient. De Grasse was eventually completed by France in 1956 as an anti-aircraft cruiser and sailed for decades under the Sabauzet French flag. Germany's final carrier ambition outlived the war and sailed under a different flag. From Glyndŵr in 1914 to De Grasse in 1943, Germany's entire carrier history is a story of borrowed hulls, stolen ships, and foreign designs. A nation that never once launched a carrier it had fully designed and built entirely itself. The final verdict. Across 2 world wars, Germany attempted 17 carrier projects. Purpose-built ships, military conversions, requisitioned merchant vessels, seized foreign hulls, 17 attempts, 0 completions. The reasons were never simple. Industrial overstretch, the Göring problem, Hitler's obsession with battleships and submarines, the fundamental impossibility of fighting a land war in the East, a naval war in the Atlantic, and an air war over Britain simultaneously, while also building carriers that require years of sustained investment and a trained aviation culture that did not exist. Every other major naval power eventually got there, carriers to sea and into combat. Britain used hers to cripple the Italian fleet and sink the Bismarck. America used hers to win the Pacific. Even Germany's ally Japan built carriers that changed the course of history, for better and for worse. Germany built none, not one that ever flew a single aircraft in anger. The wreck of Graf Zeppelin, resting 88 meters deep in the Baltic off the Polish coast, is the physical monument to what happens when ambition, bureaucracy, politics, and strategic confusion collide across 30 years of trying. Germany wanted carriers. Germany needed carriers. Germany tried, repeatedly, desperately, to build carriers. And Germany failed every single time, in every single way.